Anger versus fear. Fear holds us back from doing a lot of the things we want to do to accomplish our goals and desires. Fear can paralyze us, especially when we're confronted by bullies or threatened by more powerful people. Like all human emotions, fear has its proper place in human behavior. That's why God made all living creatures with a little organism in our brains called the amygdala. That's a little fight-flight sensor which tells us instinctually when to run and when to stand and fight. The flight impulse is a lot stronger than the fight impulse in most people. That's why there are a whole lot more cowards in the world than there are heroes. Many years ago, when I was a boisterous young Marine in a training group, several of the fellows in our platoon went out and got drunk one night on that cheap nickel beer over at the enlisted men's club. Well, we returned to the barracks later that evening in a rather tumultuous state of behavior, and when ordered to settle down and turn the lights out by our conscientious class leader, a tall, lanky, and highly conscientious young fellow named Gooch, I made the mistake of expressing my objection to Gooch's authority over me, and before I knew what happened, Gooch angrily punched me right square in the nose, so hard that my personal lights went out immediately. The only lights I could see were the stars in my head. It was a disabling blow, and it hurt ferociously. Well, the duty NCO wrote the disturbance up in his logbook as a riot in the barracks, and my name ended up right at the top of the list, as it should have, of those accused of instigating it. Gooch marched the group of us to the first sergeant's office the first thing the next morning for non-judicial punishment, an informal version of a court-martial. I remember snarling at Gooch as we marched down the street in single file. "Gooch, my head hurts too much to fight you right now. But if my head ever quits hurting, I'm going to get you good for that sucker punch last night." I never did get Gooch back because I sobered up and my head quit hurting and I came to my senses and I realized that, well, Gooch was right and I was wrong. On the other hand, maybe I was just more scared of Gooch than I was mad at him. In any event, Gooch's anger had served him well that day. He had quelled a riot in the barracks with just one punch to my nose. My fear of Gooch worked pretty well for me, too. During my next 8 years or so of military service, I never again had to be brought up for court-martial for anything. Fear fosters inactivity. It causes us to freeze up. Anger, on the other hand, tends to produce action. It's hard to get angry without pain of some sort, and it's hard to get revved up to fight without getting mad. I sometimes recall how I felt in my youth at the beginning of a high school football game. At first, I dreaded getting knocked to the ground by a big bruiser on the other team. But then, when that inevitably did happen, I was left with only two choices. I could, number one, get scared, or two, get mad. A scared player might fake an injury to get himself taken out of the game, or maybe he'll just spend the entire game holding back on his blocks and tackles because he's afraid of getting hurt again, causing his team to lose the game. A fighting mad player, on the other hand, will get up off the ground highly motivated to plow into anyone wearing a different colored jersey than the one he's wearing. And that's what I did. After getting the fear knocked out of me, I could run with that football like nobody's business. I could block and tackle like I really meant it because I was highly motivated. I was fighting mad. My high school football coach one time teased me after a practice session in which I got mad with him for chastising me about goofing off too much. He said, "All Britain, you ain't much of a football player until you get mad. So I guess I'm going to have to make you mad more often." When legendary NFL football player Howie Long was asked by a reporter why he retired early from professional football, he replied, "Well, I just couldn't keep getting myself mad enough to play every week." My father once owned a bulldog puppy named Rusty. Daddy wanted to train Rusty to catch hogs. As was a common practice at the time, Daddy introduced Rusty to the hog catching business by tossing him into the hog pen with 3 or 4 large pigs. The pigs didn't like this strange creature in their living space, and they immediately began running to and fro around the pen, snorting and squealing in protest. Now, little Rusty, he didn't like what was going on either. The poor little fella crouched to the ground and froze with fear and trembling right there in the middle of that pig pen with them crazy pigs scurrying all about all around him. Well, it didn't take long before one of the pigs slammed right into poor little Rusty and knocked him sideways onto his back, right in all that nasty mud and straw and slop. What a humiliating experience it was for poor little Rusty. Now, did I mention that Rusty was a bulldog? Well, if you know anything about bulldogs, you know that bulldogs are aggressive and instinctive fighters. So you never want to make a bulldog mad. If you do, he's liable to eat you for lunch. Suffice it to say that an angry bulldog is a highly motivated bulldog. Consequently, Rusty came alive like a bolt of lightning, and he went after them pigs fearlessly. In fact, he had to be forcibly pulled out of the pen to rescue the hogs. As the years rolled on, Rusty and I had to get control of our tempers to stay out of jail. Uncontrollable temper is not a good thing, and certainly it's not a godly virtue. Still, I recall from my Bible readings when God himself got angry with the people a few times, and it wasn't a pretty sight. He did exactly what my father used to do when he came home from work and found 5 lazy sons laying up in the floor watching television. Daddy kicked butt and took names. Some say God doesn't get angry, that he only gets righteously indignant. Well, whatever. In conclusion, I think if a lot more of us don't start getting fighting mad about some of the things that's going on around us these days and start doing something about it, God's going to eventually get mad himself, or righteously indignant, or whatever you want to call it. And he's going to start kicking some serious butt and taking names. It's going to be sort of like when Daddy got home. Oh boy.